right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again. It is 4 o'clock Eastern on a Tuesday. That means it's time once again for the briefing room. Yes, indeed, my name is Eric Kavanaugh. I will be your host for today's event, along with Nadia Dobrinskaya of Magnitude Software, Simba Technologies in particular. She's part of that group at Magnitude Software, and William McKnight, president of McKnight Consulting Group. This is the 10th anniversary year for the briefing room, and we were just joking before the show that William has been in consulting for 20 years, so we're not getting any younger, but hopefully we are getting wiser. The topic for today is all about data access. Now, as many of you know, most data is accessed by ODBC and JDBC drivers. They've been around for a long, long time. Simba is the company that built those drivers. So Simba has been really at the heart of data access for many, many years now. And there have been some really interesting developments in terms of updating how you access data. And if you think about it, that's pretty important. It's basically good timing because the information economy is well upon us now. And what do people want to do with digital transformation? They want to build applications. They want to build apps, whether for their mobile device or for the enterprise or whatever the case may be. App development is extremely important. And we're going to see a whole lot about how that gets done today. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to our first speaker. Folks, don't be shy. Feel free to ask questions at any time using the Q&A component of your webcast console, or you can use the chat window as well. And with that, Nadia, I think you wanted to share your screen. There you go. Folks, don't be shy about the questions. The best way to get custom value is to ask a question to fulfill your need for information. And with that, I'm handing it off to Nadia. Take it away.
Thank you, Eric. That was a great intro. Before I jump into it, at one point in my life, I was really into theater, and I joined a local community theater group. So let me just tell you a quick story about one of our productions. Okay, so being part of this theater group, we were putting together a play called The Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol. On one of our show nights, 7 p.m. start, we were there early running a dress rehearsal because, as you can imagine, to put on a play requires a lot of people coming together to execute and showcase their craft. There were actors, dancers, music, lighting, stage crew. It's a lot of people. So here we were in our dress rehearsal, and everything and anything was going wrong. Lighting was off, music was incorrect, actors and dancers were getting into each other's way. After this excruciating run-through, our director sat us down and said, "None of you are listening to each other. Each and every one of you is doing your individual job correctly, but you're not paying attention to your partners. There's no collaboration. You need to come out of yourself and see the bigger picture." And then our director said this to us: "This is a small community. We can't afford to lose our audience. I will not jeopardize the future of this theater, and after our performance tonight, I will refund all our customers." And you know, as an artist, this is not something that you want to hear from your director. And actually, as anyone, on a regular person, no one wants to hear that from their leader. So we all took a moment to reflect on what he had said to us, and we changed our perspective. We started reacting to each other. We started listening to our partners. That night was one of our best shows. So what does my story have to do with the future of digital transformation and dynamic apps? Well, that's partnership. It's working with our partners who are data source vendors, such as Cloudera, KX, Amazon Redshift, Google BigQuery. It's working with our partners who make applications and visualizations, such as Qlik, Tableau, MicroStrategy. It's listening and reacting to where they are and where they want to take their business. Our partner's success is our success. Because together with our partners, we are collaborating to help our customers solve real-world problems. What do I mean when I say our data source partners and our application partners? Well, I'm going to take KX as an example of a data source partner. KX is a lead provider in an in-memory time series database technology. The database is KDB+. And so what the users of KDB wanted, i.e. KX customers, what they wanted is they wanted to utilize BI tools such as Tableau, Power BI to access data stored in KDB+. And in 2019, together with KX, we were able to make this a reality. Okay, so that's a data source partner. What is an application partnership? Well, it's our software vendor provider in the business of applications. SAS is one example. SAS recently became a Simba technology partner. My colleague and I attended the SAS Global Forum a few months back in Dallas. And let me just highlight one of the powerful capabilities of SAS. One of SAS customers used artificial intelligence to detect brain tumors. And the accuracy of the detection which they were able to achieve using SAS software meant that the patients who might not have qualified for the treatment now do. And that can mean life or death. These are some very powerful tools. And honestly, this is one of the reasons I love working at Simba. If we can help our partners deliver reliable data so that they allow their customers to make differences in people's lives, that's just job satisfaction right there. We may play a small part, but it's a crucial part because underneath it all is data. Okay, so another type of partnership I wanted to touch on that goes far beyond just providing data connectivity is our partnership with MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy is an example of an application partner. Why are they a special use case? Well, MicroStrategy, with them, we went as far as automated application testing of our connectors. We have determined which tools they would like us to use to provide reporting of tests, and then we have even embedded some of our developers into their Scrum meetings. We've basically integrated ourselves into their release cycle. And all of these partnerships, they go back to listening and hearing what our partners' needs are. It's reacting to where they are and where they want to take their business. So, what is it exactly that Simba does? I mentioned ODBC and JDBC earlier. I'll get into that a little bit, but first I'd like to illustrate a problem that Simba has been addressing. If we think from a single application, let's say Tableau, and let's say Tableau wants to connect to a few data sources, to connect to Oracle, Tableau would have to create an Oracle connector. And then if they wanted to connect to Salesforce, Tableau would have to develop a different connector for Salesforce, and so forth. The way the data is extracted from Salesforce will be different than the way that data is extracted from, let's say, KX. So Tableau will need to understand these requirements for each data source. All the code to get access to data will need to be maintained. And if a data source has a new API release, code will need to be modified to reflect this new API. For example, Salesforce, I believe they have about 3 releases per year. So as you can imagine, the more BI applications that are added to the mix and the more data sources that are added, this quickly becomes a very complex matrix. So where does Simba fit in? Well, using SQL and either ODBC or JDBC, we can greatly simplify connectivity. And so for the illustration, just for this presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk about ODBC a little bit in the next little bit. So now, let's look at how we can help. Let's take Tableau again. So Tableau would only need to write one code base utilizing the ODBC API. The application no longer needs to know how data is stored in a specific data source. It only needs to know what kind of ODBC call it needs to make to access this information. And what we can do, if a user wants to connect to S3, we can connect using our S3 driver. If a user wants to connect to Oracle, a driver for Oracle, SQL Server, driver for SQL Server. And this is all connecting and obtaining live data. So going back, recall that I mentioned that we partner with data source vendors. We build the official ODBC driver connectors. These include Google BigQuery, Amazon Redshift, Cloudera Impala. So what are some of the benefits our partners receive from these relationships that we have? Well, I love using examples. Let me take Google BigQuery. The new BigQuery storage API, currently in beta release, and this storage API drastically improves performance. And this whole time that they've been working on their API, Simba has been working alongside Google developing the ODBC and JDBC drivers to utilize this API. Thus, our partners and anyone using our drivers is able to take advantage of the improved performance. And in some cases, our tests show that the performance increases tenfold. That's huge. Again, it's listening. Where's Google BigQuery going, and where can we help? So the ODBC and the JDBC concept has been around since the 90s, okay? Simba partnered with Microsoft in 1991 to co-develop the first ODBC driver. It is out of this partnership that the ODBC standards come about. You know, I had to use the calculation because 1991 does not seem that far off, but that's 28 years ago. Okay, so ODBC and JDBC might not be the new concept, but it has been tested and it is reliable. It's exactly what anyone would expect from data connectivity, reliable data. And we've always been innovative. We provide one of the first commercial ODBC drivers for Hadoop and NoSQL sources. And we've developed drivers to multiple SAS data sources. So talking about the history, what are some of the new technologies we've been working on? Okay. And before I get to that, the question is, before we look into what are the new technologies, what do our partners care about? And remember, our partners may be up in the application space, or they may be in a data source vendor, or provide cloud solutions. Regardless of their business, our partners want to deliver solutions to their customers that work. And underneath any problem that a customer will have is data. So the question is, where is data stored? So since 2013, the amount of available data sources has been growing tremendously. So in 2013, 151, and in 2019, 350. That's about just doubling in 6 years. So adding SaaS and social media connectors, such as, for example, Concur, Eloqua, Marketo, SurveyMonkey, the data stored starts becoming very large. And so as the amount of data sources increase, our partners end up increasing the number of connectors that you're utilizing. How can we help them be successful in expanding their market? And for us, the question then becomes, how can we help our partners manage connectivity? And in order to tackle this big question, we first broke it down into a series of smaller questions. For example, how are our partners delivering their product? Is it a cloud solution or is it on-premise? Are they delivering all our connectors with their product? Is it a one single installer with our connectors? Then how large is it? How are our partners' customers using the product? Is the end user interacting with the driver? And where are the customers installing the product? Is it on the user's desktop or server? And then how are customers updating those connectors? Because as you can imagine, every time a data source has an update or a new API, we follow up supporting these new updates and new releases of our driver. Thus, how will our partner deliver the new driver to their customers? What technical expertise do the customers have? Will the end user go into the registry? And what kind of UI does the end user see? Will our partner create a UI for their customers or rely on the UI that's already provided? And of course, how are the customers managing the access to data? Because every data source has some sort of authentication. Can the end user utilize the product directly, or do they require help from IT? And these are all open-ended questions. The answers to these questions are dependent on the specific partner and their specific needs. And this is where, again, the communication and the listening comes in. We've taken these questions into account and came up with a product aiming to help our partners do what they do best. And this product is our Gateway Embedded solution. And what I want to just say here is that our embedded solutions is, of course, aimed to help the software vendor partners be successful. However, we do consider enterprises because we do have enterprise customers too, and we have a product similar to the one that I will be talking about today. And this product is just Gateway Enterprise, and it's aimed towards the enterprise business. So how can Gateway help? Magnitude Gateway can help decouple connectors from the application. Okay, and that's huge. So in the diagram, let's just look at the diagram on the right. There are two main components of Magnitude Gateway. There's the Gateway client, which is in the dark blue up top. It is the universal ODBC, or it can be a JDBC driver. And again, it's dependent if it's an ODBC driver or a JDBC driver, really depends on the application's choice, what the application wants to use, like I showed earlier when Tableau wanted to use the ODBC API. So this universal ODBC or JDBC driver is very stable. It's built on top of Simba's client-server protocol, which has been around for a long time. The bottom line is, the ODBC or the JDBC client will not require significant or frequent updates, all right? So that's the client side, and then the client connects to the gateway server, and that's in the light blue color just below. So one of the points there under point 4 is the standard adapters. So the server holds the standard adapters, and these adapters are what connects to the actual data store. It can be a relational data store, NoSQL, cloud, SaaS, big data, and so forth. As new versions of API come out or new security patches come out, it's the adapter that will need to be updated on the server. So as you can see now from the architecture, the application can now bundle the universal ODBC connector, and no updates would be necessary to a client. Release of the new connectors would no longer require our software partners to release a new update of the application. The Gateway solution is even flexible enough to let the end users themselves update the adapter on the server side. So by decoupling the application from the adapters, it removes the overhead of the releases associated with the connectivity updates. And just even looking further, let's take an extra step. Imagine that the software vendor will no longer need to bundle all the connectors when they're delivering their application to the end user. So the end user could be an enterprise, and they might only be interested in 3 connectors, whereas the software vendor has about 20 connectors available. Imagine the reduction in the footprint. So looking at some other benefits with Gateway, there's, of course, the reduced time to market. It takes a long time to build a widespread connectivity, especially for new software vendors. So building against one interface, either ODBC or JDBC, and utilize SQL. It can be as easy as plug in the different adapters and connect to any data source. Of course, there's also shrinking of development and maintenance costs, which will also encompass testing as well as infrastructure setup. So setting up the data sources, populating those data sources, and so forth. Other benefits can include expanding target market. So for example, software vendor might start out with a handful of connectors, let's say, and then a prospect will require access to a data source not on the list. Well, it's just as simple as adding a new adapter. So another benefit is we can provide connectors and our partners can focus their efforts on their core offering. Why not leave the tedious connectivity to the connectivity experts? And of course, as I mentioned, we have existed for nearly 30 years. We have good expertise and good relationships with our data source vendors. So I mentioned that we cater products to our software vendors and enterprise customers. We have considered some of the benefits for the enterprise customer. And we also understand that our partners and users are enterprises. So let's look at some of the benefits for the end user. Imagine an enterprise user. This can be your data analyst or your HR person or an operation manager. These folks will no longer need to worry about where to find connectors for data access. IT can set it up in a central magnitude gateway, and end users will be able to connect. And looking from the IT perspective, for updating adapters, that can also be done on the server. There's only one place to update the adapter compared to having to update on each person's individual computer. How much time can IT save? And just going further down the topic of enterprises and users, what about UI? Okay, so currently for JDBC and Linux ODBC drivers, there is no user interface. Windows ODBC has an ODBC administrator, which is quite outdated. So here's a screenshot of the ODBC administrator. As you can see, it's not very intuitive. It's difficult to separate required fields versus optional fields for connection. And here is what we have done with gateway settings in comparison. So as number one, what I wanted to draw attention is the adapters tab. This is where the end user will be able to add, update new adapters. The gateway DSN, as shown right here, will allow the end user to set up information for the connection. And underneath the primary tab, this will be everything that might be the minimal requirements to have this connection. This is where you would set up your authentication and so forth. Secondary tab next to primary is, for example, proxy. And proxy is if you require proxy information and so forth. So basically, additional tabs are there just to allow for additional configurations of the driver. However, if an end user needs to, they can just fill out the primary tab and that should get them connected. So, and then one more thing that I wanted to touch on is what else have we made available in Gateway? Okay, and this is really exciting because it is our intelligent adapters. Okay, and currently for the intelligent adapters, we have two that we aimed for the data sources, and it's Salesforce and Oracle e-Business Suite. So the intelligent adapters are designed to answer specific questions. So I'm going to use Salesforce as an example. A view in Salesforce called Salesforce Representative Matrix exists from this intelligent adapter. And it can give the sales team information such as how many opportunities does each salesperson have opened during the quarter, what are their close rates, how many opportunities are closed won, and how much revenue is still outstanding, just as example. And this is all in a single view. And how do we make these views possible? Well, this slide shows the SQL behind one of these views. And you don't need to worry about the details. It's something we put together to simplify it for the end user. The SQL is complex and can join multiple tables together. It's an intelligent view and to help the user answer business questions. These views are configured, and it's not just a standard view that that's the same for everybody, because these views are configured based on individual user permissions, and it takes into account organization's configuration. So for example, for Salesforce, one organization might have multi-currency enabled while another doesn't. So our intelligent adapters determine whether or not it's configured, and then the appropriate SQL is generated. So again, the intelligent adapters are focused on making it very simple for business users to get actionable data for complex systems. So we have Gateway Embedded release coming out very, very shortly. And this was kind of a sneak peek into the Gateway. You will be able to get your hands on and try the product yourself. And this brings me to the end of my portion of the webinar. If we step back and take a look at the bigger picture, where are the applications taking their business? What solutions do the data source provide? How can connectivity expose data? And it encompasses quite a large number of players. And it's almost like a play, where everyone's role is crucial, because the audience is not going to be forgiving. Our audience are our end users. We need to partner and work together to provide solutions which work. Okay, and I am going to hand it back.
Thank you. I will take the reins. That was an excellent presentation, Nadia, and I have to say, looking at that timeline was really quite impressive. It goes to show you how long Simba has been working at that very foundation. I mean, honestly, folks, applications can't do anything if they don't have the data. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, I suppose, but nonetheless, I'm saying it just as a reminder to folks, because data access is really, really important, and saving time is so important. You know, as you think about hand coding, for example, before the show we were talking about highlights of the briefing room, and I remember my good buddy Rick Sherman years ago talking about how a lot of companies will hand code ETL scripts early in some project. And that works for a while until the data really scales out and becomes significant. And then guess what? It's not going to work at all. It becomes very brittle. You wind up kind of chasing your tail in the IT space, trying to hammer out all these little issues, play whack-a-mole, if you will. That's not what you want your IT folks doing. You want your IT folks tackling bigger, meatier challenges that are going to help your business. So if you can solve the data access problem by having a marshaling area for deploying your data sources, your connectivity, and so forth, that is going to save a tremendous amount of time and effort, by the way. It's easier to turn off. It's easier to provision. There's so many ways that it improves your entire application infrastructure, your whole landscape, that is really, it's just a smart way to get things done. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to William McKnight. Take it away, William.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Nadia. That was a tremendous presentation. That was one of the best briefings that I believe I've had in a long time. So hopefully that value proposition got carried across there. We're going to bring Nadia back to the microphone, so stay close. Very shortly, I have a brief presentation here. But first, a few observations on that excellent presentation. I want to underscore some of the things that Nadia said. One is that no matter what layer of the stack, it's not just for BI, right? No matter what layer of the stack that you're in, and this could be third party as well, there are innumerable connections. There's an all-time high number of connections that are needed in the enterprise today. And as I look at new products coming into the BI space and the data management space and the data integration space and all the spaces that are associated therein, I asked the question about scalable connections. How are you going to scale the connections in this? Because this solution, if it's successful, it's going to need data from a lot of different places, because organizations are not dialing things back to make sure that they get things under control before they move forward into newer technologies. Not with IT disintermediated the way that it is. And this is causing, opportunity, of course, hopefully, but it's also causing a lot of problems internally. And one of the problems that you want to take off the table is the idea of the scalable connections. And be sure that you're scaling your connections to the enterprise of today, not the enterprise of yesterday, when maybe you could do it on a onesie-twosie basis. But today I look for that in my solutions that get brought into enterprises. And I also want to add that as much as there's been evolving in the, let's just pick on the BI space, there's been a lot of that. I think we're actually on the cusp of a new generation of BI solutions, one that incorporates natural language processing, ones that incorporate artificial intelligence, and so on. And when Nadia showed us that there were 347 databases out there, I just wiped my brow, because I think I spend a lot of time in the database space, but I could not name 347 databases, or let alone anything close to that. So it just keeps going. So I guess what I want to underscore here today in a few brief slides here is the importance of data connectivity in the enterprise. We are in the business of data. Information is exploding. It's real time all the time. Our information differentiates us from our competitors, and we have it in a lot of places in the enterprise. Yes, there are different places of consolidation, and we like those. We like the data warehouse. We like maybe the data lake. But in many organizations, this just adds more sources to the mix, more databases to the mix with quality data, because that causes there to be marks off of those sources, and enterprises get ideas about the things they can do with that data now that it's in a controlled area. Information is used and reused. Information usage drives data value, and information is a key business asset in enterprises today. And I want to add to Nadia's presentation, she mentioned, yes, enterprises are interested in this too. I would say it's a strong allure to something like the Simba Gateway, because enterprises today, a lot of them are claiming to be or wanting to be technology companies, no matter what business they're in. Insurance, I have insurance clients that want to be technology companies. They want that technology valuation, and they're almost acting like software houses in and of themselves. And that's great, but that just means that as they try to customize their environment, as they're going to approach these problems that software companies do as well. So they may be very well interested in something like that. Let me go the other way. Data maturity is highly correlated to business success. Now, we've done studies on this. We've detailed what these levels of data maturity are, but there's a level that everybody needs to be at today. I do believe. We call it a 3, and I can explain that offline, but I think, you can all kind of think about it and think about what is that level 3. You need to get there. You need to get there as soon as possible. Unfortunately, not too many companies are there, and this is going to cause a lot of turnover. We know there's a lot of turnover in the S&P 500, for example. I think that the S&P 500 of the future is going to get turned over on account of data, because it is really the gold asset of today, to mix the metaphors in there. And I think data science pioneers are locking in today. Now is the time. Now is the time to lock in if you want to be a data science pioneer, if you believe in this notion of being data-driven. And we encourage you to be a fake-it-till-you-make-it data scientist, if that's what you have to be, because that's where a lot of them will come from. There's just not enough of them coming out of PhD programs and so on. And furthermore, there's profiles of data scientists, different profiles that make sense in an enterprise. So there's a lot of opportunity here. The first wave of data science leaders have already emerged and are reaping the exponential benefits. So we want you, the listener to the briefing room, to be on that list. So you're going to need a lot of data. Yes, hopefully you're not stuck in the past. Just give me some data, give it to me fast. Give me good data, but do it efficiently. Now it's all data, fast and effectively. So as organizations struggle to keep up with all the data, trying to get it all under control, trying to get their data science On top of all that data, that means they're spinning up more and more sources and in need of more and more connections in the enterprise. And really, enterprises need to be working on their data layer, not just the BI AI layer. We see too much of this. We actually see too much of just BI, frankly, not enough AI, and definitely not enough data. And so if there's a problem in the environment, it's usually below that waterline, but enterprises don't always know this, and they spend a lot of time above the waterline working on BI, trying to make that a very complicated environment, yet get some finite thing out of the whole data layer when they really need to be working on the data layer. And unfortunately, sometimes that data layer means that there's so many different ill-fitted pieces of data inside of various data stores, and this just creates a need for more and more connections. And so in the enterprise, you're measured by different things. You're measured by user satisfaction, of course. Historically, that's kind of all it's been, but now, as data people, we're expected to be leaders in the organization, and I think leadership is coming out of the data realm and increasingly, more and more. So we're expected to grow the business. We're expected to improve data maturity. Why? So we can grow the business in the future. So if you're a software company out there looking to help an enterprise, help grow its data maturity, help make these people successful. And one of the things that we can do there is make sure that our software is connected all over that complex enterprise. Now, I mentioned some ill-fitting platforms out there in the enterprise. Of course, plenty of that. And I think that that's a very dominant factor in terms of the success of the overall application, the overall platform, getting into the right, let's say, category. Category might be like a cloud storage, might be like a cloud analytical database, might be an on-prem database, it might be Hadoop, it might be data streaming, all these sorts of things. You got to get the workload into the right category and quit doing one-size-fits-all and how we've done it forever. And that leads us into a more heterogeneous environment that needs the increasing management that tools like Simba Gateway provides. So this guy, apparently he has a pretty wild ride over there at Disney. The Toad guy here, he has nothing on us. It's been a wild ride. But I'm here to say it's going to continue to be a wild ride. It's going to continue to be an expansion of the possibilities. I see it all the time. I am looking at various leading-edge BI and AI products and thinking there's probably a place in the enterprise for this. It's going to come by hook or by crook. I know that there are some enterprises sitting on their hands right now in terms of, well, haven't we made a big investment here? Yes, but are you reaping all the rewards yet? Is really the question. Is there ROI still to come? And there certainly is. I kind of view the enterprise as like an accordion where right now we're pulling that thing out. We're opening it up. Now, down the road, maybe there will be a little bit more consolidation of software, consolidation of tools. There are some shoots on the horizon in that regard. But right now, we're not making decisions based upon that. We're making decisions based upon the fact that we all see that accordion opening up. And when it closes, you'll probably hear about it on the briefing room. But right now, there's so many different possibilities out there. And so it's really hard to keep up with all the connections that an enterprise has to have. And guess what? Here comes something new. AI. Yes, enterprises are definitely diving into AI. I believe that data's new highest use, very soon, will be training AI algorithms, not reporting, not even analytics. AI is beyond analytics. And data is going to be needed for this future. You must have enough data to analyze, to build the models. Your data will determine the depth of AI that you can achieve. For example, statistical modeling, machine learning, or deep learning, and its accuracy. The increased availability of data is the single biggest contributor to the uptake in AI, where it is thriving. Indeed, data's highest use in the organization soon will be training algorithms. This represents a profound change requiring a commensurate level of strategic focus and urgency, and this should disrupt the current thinking process of the organization. This can produce high-impact enterprise outcomes now, and that's why it's being undertaken. So we have another level of accordion opening up. We have another level coming of tools and technologies that are going to be added to the mix of the enterprise today for this reason. Now, here's a few examples of AI in action out there at some leading organizations. AI is tackling fraud. We're all interacting now with chatbots, for better or for worse, I might add. There's a lot of transportation uses for AI, reducing the cost of handling misplaced items, and just replacing automated paper-based processes, and predicting things, predicting maintenance, predicting flight delays. And of course, not just predicting it, but now organizations are getting out in front of it and being advised what actions to take based upon that future that is now becoming more highly predictable. Now, the skills of the data professional have historically been on the right side of this line, okay, right, between operational and analytical. Now, the line's getting a little fuzzy, I will admit that. There's still a difference, but I see that our skill sets over here are moving back into the operational realm. That data is not just operational data sitting there doing one thing and then getting pushed over into a data warehouse. It is doing many things now. It is being activated with analytics. The environment on the left side of this line, though it's always been complicated, you think about like SAP has been a big footprint there in some shops, for example. That's pretty complicated in and of itself. But beyond a package like that, we're adding operational hubs. We're adding operational analytics. We're adding master data management. We're adding third-party data coming into that environment where it is highly leverageable. And so it's getting pretty complicated over there in terms of data as well. So not only is it complicated on the analytical side of things where we're adding data marts and data lakes, it's happening on the operational side as well. And the point of this is our skills are necessary to go over there and keep that in line. But nonetheless, there's going to be an opening up of the possibilities, an opening up of the data stores. And I like to get data stores in order. It's one of the things I do as a consultant is try to organize the environment, try to minimize the clutter, if you will, and try to get things into one of these platforms. I won't read them all, but one of these platforms that makes sense in an enterprise still today. And things that are doing multiple functions, things that do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, things that kind of, it's all bottoms up, it's not architected, things like that we like to get rid of. But probably the fact is it remains because it does a function, and organizations, like I said before, are pushing forward into new areas. I mean, look at this. This is actually a little bit simplified from what the big architecture picture, for me anyway, looked like in 2018, because some things have been baked now into databases. Databases are becoming little ecosystems in and of themselves with graph data inside the database being able to turn itself into a columnar direction, the database being able to utilize memory for storage, etc. The architecture is still pretty complicated, though. And there's a little bit of what I was saying on the operational side of things. And by the way, everything you see here has that other perspective of potentially being in a cloud and potentially not being in the same cloud as everything else is. So you have the hybrid cloud happening in so many different organizations. That just adds to the complexity of the organization today. And the data lake, I can't say how complex the environment is getting without mentioning this is one of the big 800-pound gorillas that's causing some of the additions to the environment. It's a great way to store the data that really forms the foundation for artificial intelligence. It's doing a lot of the things you see here in marketing, cybersecurity, smart cities, oil and gas, life sciences, and so on. Really, every industry can utilize a data lake today, and should be, frankly. Most of them really should be. And you look on the right, and these are just some typical data domains. And one exercise I like to do with my clients is take their inventory, their product inventory, the project inventory, I should say, and match it up against the data domains of the enterprise and see, do we need to do something about how the data is organized so that we can utilize the same data domain across different applications. And this is an effective way I found of building out the sequencing of events in the organization. Nonetheless, it's going to be pretty complicated. So this brings me to the Q&A part of the briefing room. And Eric, I'm going to let you give us any introduction that needs to happen here, and then I have some questions for Nadia.
Sure. I'll just throw one question from an attendee over to Nadia, or maybe you can even kind of comment on this first. But one of the attendees asks, is data maturity universal? Is it a universal concept to be measured across all industry verticals? If so, do we have an industrial ranking on these levels? I mean, I think the short answer there is yes, but what do you think, William? And then Nadia.
Data maturity, a universal concept to be measured across industry verticals. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. If so, do we have an industrial ranking on these levels? I mean, yes, I can talk about what I believe, what industries I believe are leading the field and what industries are lagging the field and so on in terms of their data maturity. A lot of participants in industry are going to be looking at their peers in that industry, though, and letting that be a determinant of, where they go with their data maturity. But there are some universal things about data today. If you're an enterprise over, say, 10,000 people or some number that indicates a good size, there are definitely some universal maxims around data that you really need to be following if you want to be a leader, if you want to really even survive in that industry. And they have a lot to do with how you do data integration, how you do data warehousing, how your readiness is for artificial intelligence, your governance, and so on. That's a whole other presentation, but yes, there are some universal concepts. And so everybody out there can get value from not just looking at themselves and their industry, but across various industries.
Mm-hmm. And Nadia, do you have any comment on that? Just the concept of data maturity and how to measure it, I guess. What do you think about that, Nadia?
Well, just even from the perspective of ODBC and JDBC, because that's what we specialize in, there's a lot of standards that are involved in terms of how data is retrieved. We have our SDK product at which we build a lot of our drivers on top, so that we try to standardize a lot of these aspects as well, so that the data that's coming in, and then again also being able to use, we are very big in the BI space, so similar applications that can be utilized to access, to just have that standardization across.
Okay, and then William, go ahead with your questions for Nadia.
I will do, and I'm glad that the questioner brought up security, because that is the number one area of questions that I like to dive into. And we didn't hear enough about that from you, Nadia, in regards to Simba. So I want to give you another opportunity. What about security? How does Simba help protect data?
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up, because yes, I did not touch on that in my presentation, but of course, security is very important, and we do address security. So I'm going to kind of address it from the ODBC, JDBC perspective. So we are data connectivity. And we're basically transiting data in between. And oftentimes, we look at the data sources themselves, and we look at what kind of authentication mechanisms do the data sources support. For example, if it's a SaaS, there's going to be some sort of OF2. So if that exists in the data source and they have OF2 step authentication, for example, then of course we implement that, because we want the users to utilize authentication processes. So if SSL is supported, we utilize SSL. If there's Kerberos, we use that. So we support what the data sources have available. Now that's looking at it from just from the ODBC, and now we have this new player, Gateway, coming in. And of course, we do the same thing in Gateway as we do in our ODBC and JDBC, so authentication is of course there. But what we do for Gateway is we have strong encryption between our client and their server, so that when the data is transferred, it's just safely transferred. Now, no data is ever stored in the ODBC or JDBC client side. and no data is ever stored in the gateway. It's kind of like transiting through. For our gateway, as I showed, there is some configuration data that is required for the connection that is stored, and it is in the centralized gateway server. It is encrypted and protected because we take that very seriously. And of course, as you can imagine, for example, if we're using OpenSSL, there's new constant updates, so we are keeping an eye of what some of the security threats are, and we make sure that we provide the connectors with the new versions. And that goes back to that question of how quickly are our partners able to integrate those connectors, because sometimes these security threats are big, and we have a connector ready, and then we push them to our partners, and we just tell them, so here it is, this is what it addresses, it's in your interest to upgrade and have the new release of the connector.
Okay, I see. So you mentioned the data store, and that helps me understand it from an architectural standpoint better. Can you say a little bit more, though, about that data store? Does it act like a cache? What kind of data is it storing?
So what do you mean by the data store? Because we don't store anything in our connectors. It's just the data that's kind of, imagine it like the application makes a call and it gets passed to our driver, and our driver passes that information back to the data source. So the data source,
okay.
and I say that can be, for example, Concur, right? So,
okay.
And we make that authentication OF2, so we pass in with the token, but the data, as soon as Concur does the, let's say, the processing and passes it back to our driver, we just let it go through. We don't cache anything, we don't store anything, and it goes back. So when I was saying data store, I meant data source. So I might have misspoken there. Yeah. Thanks for catching that.
Thank you for that answer, and that helps a lot because I was a little confused about that. So great. Well, will Gateway work with drivers which aren't developed by Simba? Other drivers?
Okay. So in the current version, because this is a new product, it will be our first version 1 release coming up this week. So currently we were just focusing on the drivers that we do have. However, we do recognize that this can be very beneficial, and we don't want to limit our users because we might not have a connector that they might want to be interested in utilizing it. So we are working on a roadmap to allow Gateway to work with other drivers. Yes. Okay.
Good to know. Good to know. Now, the development time savings is obvious, and I talked a little bit about that. But I know one thing that enterprises are concerned about, and therefore software companies would be concerned about, is performance. Now, once the queries are running, is there any performance overhead?
Okay. So the general question, it depends, because we are very flexible and we have to work with the data sources that exist. So let me just kind of paint a few examples, and then we can go from there. So I mentioned that sometimes our clients can choose to put our drivers on users' desktops, okay? So all the kind of like the processing, let's just take a look at that, can be happening on the desktop side, okay? Now, sometimes our clients can choose to put the solution on the server and have a different means to communicate through. So now the processing can be happening on the server, which has higher capability processing and so forth. So that's looking in terms of where the user puts it on. Now, looking in terms of the data sources themselves. So some data sources allow some of the processing to happen on the data source side. Okay? So if that is the case, what we want to do to improve performance is we want to pass it on to the server and then only come back with the data that we're looking for, that If we still need to do more processing, that can be done on the client, so improved in performance. So let me just give an example, because REST is a great example for this. And REST is moving, let's say, JSON objects over the network. So, of course, looking into what your network is also important. So let's say if we were to just say, give me all the data from, let's say, RESTful, from Concur or Marketo. Let's use Marketo. I use Concur already. So all the data is going to come back, and then the driver will return this data. Now the user can say, give me all the data from Marketo where ID is equals to this. Okay, so there's two options that the driver can do. The option number one is they can go retrieve all the data from that table and then filter that on the client side. And the second option would be to pass that information to Marketo and say, give me all the data where ID is equals to that, and only one record will come back. So as you can imagine, the network and what's coming through, in the case number one, you're bringing in quite a few JSON objects over, and then you're doing the processing. You're doing all that processing on the client side. It can be client or server, but you're doing that in the driver. Versus you're making a call in the case number two, and only one record comes back. So, of course, the performance will be improved there. And that's where we work with the data sources. That's when we understand what calls does the data source make in order to make this much more performant. And I use Google BigQuery as an example. There's a new storage API that Google BigQuery is releasing specifically to improve performances. And what we had done is we said, okay, so this is great. We want our users to have this feature, and we're going to utilize this new API in order to improve performance.
Okay, I get it. That's a great
flexible.
Answer.
Yeah, so it's very flexible, and it's again, our partners on the data source side, we're kind of in the middle, and our partners on the application side. So we also listen, what is the application looking for? Can we partner, because we have this relationship partnering with both, can we relate to our data source partners what the application requires? Can we improve? How can we improve? How can it make it for their end user to be able to do their job?
Well, you're emphasizing the enormity of the job that you have sitting in the middle of all of these data sources, trying to connect them. And part of that, go ahead.
Yeah, and I really liked in your presentation, you touched on the big iceberg and the BI, and then there's data all underneath. And, you know, in your presentation, yes, like connectivity can be kind of, you know, it's tedious. It might be more interesting to see what the application, the visualizations, but the data itself is that big, huge iceberg underneath the water. Because if people are making business decisions on data that might be off a little bit, those, like a small difference in data can give a completely different picture to the end user, and they can make decisions based on incorrect data. Versus really paying to that attention. And we've had people coming back to us and said, you know, we've kind of neglected the data portion of it, and unfortunately we're not where we want it to be right now, and we need to go back and we need to fix that aspect of it.
Well, that's true. You don't want to be moving data without quality around the organization, or you get into this kind of trouble. The last question I have for you, Nadia, is related to all that responsibility that you have where you sit in the scheme of things, and that's about concurrency. Do you manage any concurrency control, like with locks or multi-version concurrency control, or coarse grain versus fine grain? Do you get into that? So
how ODBC is designed and how it usually works is that when a user, because as you can imagine, multiple users can't use the same access to the data source. When they make that connection through ODBC, the connection gets established, and all of the calls that get made on that connection work through the one from one user versus a second user having a different connection. So they'll be accessing and retrieving data at that moment of time that is stored within the data source. But oftentimes, in terms of making locks, if the data is getting updated on the back end, because the connections can be independent, it is mainly the data source itself that is able to, depends on the data source, of course, is able to see if it gets updated. But if you look from the perspective, let's say a call is being generated, I'm going to use Salesforce as an example, to retrieve the data, and it's retrieving the data in batches, let's say, as an example, and it has retrieved some data and it's calling through, and a user has made a change to the data that has already been retrieved. So the first person who's been retrieving that data, they might not see that change right away, and that's where the user might have to call the data again if somebody was making that change. But again, we're transiting through, so if someone's making a change and we're pulling it, it might have to have a refresher or retrieve the data.
Okay, and we're at the top of the hour here. I do have one or two last questions to throw at you. You know, there was a question from one of the attendees asking about API management, and isn't that really the future, certainly with respect to cloud? And in many ways, these connectors are similar to APIs, but very quickly, could you just kind of touch on the difference between the smart connectors, for example, the role of ODBC and JDBC at the core, and what someone might traditionally think of it as an API? Nadia, that's for you.
So by API management, do you mean, like, for example, if there's some data sources API rate limit? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's an example. Yeah, that's right. That's an example.
Okay, yeah. So let's say if there is, if the data source does have those restrictions, we have considered it, of course, because what happens is a user will get an error from the server because the server will say you've called too many APIs, and sometimes we have added features where we say kind of like a little bit of a back off, where we buffer, or we say, okay, give this a try. If you get an error, wait a little bit and then retry the API call again in terms of coming through. But again, it is dependent on the data source. What does the data source support? And we want to expose those features to to our users if the data source does have it.
Okay, and we have one last question from an attendee. Do the driver requirements include the scale of data pulls? I mean, I think you were kind of referring to that just now. In other words, how much can you amend the settings to adjust for particular environments and particular controls, right? And I think the answer is significantly, because you've talked a lot about how flexible it is. Is that right, Nadia?
Yes, it is flexible. A lot of the control can also come from SQL itself, so and best practices depending on the data source. So if there's filtering that is supported by the data source, we usually have best practices saying, use a where clause, use a top or a limit, depending on what the data source itself supports, and we. So, for example, select top 100, and then you will be retrieving the 100 rows, and you won't be retrieving everything. So, again, flexible depending on the data source.
Okay, well, folks, we burned through an hour here. Fantastic presentations. We got right down into the thick of things in terms of how data gets to where it needs to go. You can see all those sources on the right-hand side, for example, and the sources are just proliferating. To William's point, 347 different databases at one client. Goodness gracious, we have to rein in these environments and get much more strategic control of our information if we're going to survive in the digital world. Digital transformation is so happening right now, folks. It's just everywhere. The companies that are getting ahead of the game are really going to do well, and those that aren't are going to have a whole lot of trouble. So, folks, we do archive all these webinars for later viewing. Check back usually by tomorrow at insideanalysis.com under the archive webinars section. And with that, we're going to bid you farewell, folks, celebrating 10 years of the Briefing Room this year, all year long. Let us know if you want to be in the Briefing Room sometime. Send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. With that, we're going to close up the top and bid you farewell. We'll talk to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.